Little hidden ferro rod, little hidden ferro rod. What's up guys, Dan here, Coalcracker Bushcraft. Today we are going to be talking about smaller ferro rods, little ones just like this. So if you follow my channel for any amount of time, you know that I think a bigger ferrocerium rod for survival and bushcraft is definitely the way to go, but there is also a lot of small ferrocerium rods out there that people carry along with them and are definitely useful for other purposes. So I think it's very important that you know the small tips and tricks to use those things to their max capacity. So with that said, you might be wondering, well, at what point, if you highly recommend these larger ferrocerium rods, would you carry a smaller ferro rod? So now I'm not talking about the super micro ones. Again, I have nothing against any of these other rods. I'm just saying from a instructor standpoint and seeing people use ferrocerium rods in all different weather conditions, it really comes down to time and tension. And what I mean by that is the larger the rod, the more time it takes to scrape the rod, and then the tension is how much pressure you can add to it. So that goes across the board for any of them. So the more time and tension we have on that ferro rod, the longer the spark's going to burn. Hence, that spark is going to be able to dry out, heat up, and ultimately catch our material on fire. So when we reduce the size of our ferro rod, we're reducing the time that we can scrape across that rod. Sometimes if it goes too small, we're also going to reduce some of that tension or pressure because of the fact that it's hard to hold. But I don't want that to discourage anybody. There is an easy way, there is technique to be able to use these smaller rods. And that's what we're going to cover on today's video. Now for today's video, we're going to be using a Mora Spark Companion. If you don't know anything about these knives, Mora knives, Swedish company, very budget friendly knives. They do have higher end stuff, but budget friendly, and they're really good knives. Scandi grind. This one I have is stainless, but they make them in high carbon steel. 90-degree spine on this specific model to scrape the built-in ferro rod. Now it is a smaller ferro rod, so you have to know how to use this, and that's what we're going to do. So let's go talk about it and show you the proper way to use a small ferro rod. Pulled out my larger ferro rod just for the initial demo phase of this because number one, you can see it's a lot bigger. It's going to be easier to see what we got going on here. So this is a 6x1/2 inch ferro rod compared to something like this. You could see, look, that is, wow, comparison wise, a huge difference. But at the end of the day, they both throw sparks. You just have to know how to utilize those sparks. So with a big ferro rod, there are two techniques we generally use. One, we keep the knife still and we draw the ferro rod back off the knife. That was a horrible spark display, but you get the point. Knife still, drawing the rod back. The second option is hold the rod still and drive the knife forward off of the rod. When we're working with whatever we are going to light on fire and we're using a larger rod, time and tension, again, we get a lot more material removed from this rod, longer, hotter spark. So it's a little easy to be able to say, well, okay, I'm going to throw it from here and push all that material off. Sparks are going to shoot through the air and hit our material, or vice versa. I could just hold it and do that. Now when we switch over to a smaller rod, both techniques can work, they can light fires, but one is way better than the other. The first technique we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about why it's not the best for small ferro rods, is to hold the rod still and try to strike the rod, throwing sparks off the rod. Here's why. So we're not going to get a lot of material off this rod. The sparks, no matter how good we throw them, are going to be very short-lived, okay, because there's just not enough material there to burn. So when we are doing that onto our bundle, okay, typically when you do this, you can't just stop your knife at the end. Your knife is going to travel a little bit further, 2 to 3 to 5 inches, depending on how much control you have. So typically what happens is people try to strike and they're smashing their bundle apart. Not good, because those sparks are not going where we need them. So the better method of the two, with a slight modification, is to keep our knife still and drag the rod away from the knife. That's going to remove the material and keep it very close, falling away from the knife. Now, why is that better? Well, first of all, we have less travel time in the air with the spark, and we have no way of smashing our bundle apart, okay? So what we're gonna do though is we're not just going to hold our knife where we think. We are actually going to take the tip of our knife and we are going to set that down onto our wood. See how I'm using a reverse grip here? So I'm going to use a reverse grip. I'm going to sink that in a little bit. And now my rod is actually going to go very, very close to the material. At this point now, when I would strike my rod and pull this away, there's a very small, okay, gap between where the knife and the sparks are going to first begin to the material that we're trying to ignite. So we're closing down the gap of travel time with our sparks. We're also protecting that tinder source, whatever it may be, and we're not smashing it apart into a million pieces. So again, one more time, reverse grip on my knife. I'm going to sink my knife into the wood that we're working on, okay? And then we are going to take our ferro rod and we are going to adjust our knife and place our ferro rod here. This way, when I pull, the sparks are going to fall very quickly without much travel time right into our tinder bundle. Okay, so my knife is now planted and I'm going to give this a strike. And sometimes it's going to take one or two, but there you go. We got it lit. Sparks, max force when they hit. Exactly what we're looking for. Alright, so that's today's video. Quick tip with a smaller ferro rod. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the subscribe and like button below. You can also check us out at coalcrackerbushcraft.com for our school, our blog, and our merchandise, all that cool stuff that we make here in Pennsylvania. And that's about it. So go out, play with your ferro rod, and stay in the woods.